Hi, I'm Karl Taylor. Welcome to Karl Taylor live on social media with my colleague Ashley. And what are we doing today, Ash?
Usual question and answer, I think, unless you've got anything else in store, surprises for us, anything you want to talk about.
I've got a couple of little things I want to talk about. Nothing particularly, well, some of them are quite exciting actually, I suppose.
Yeah.
Let's have a look. The first one, right, while we're waiting, so if you've got any photography related questions, send them in. Ash has got the iPad. She'll relay the questions. She may even answer a few. I don't know.
If I can.
If she can. Let's talk about a few things while we're waiting for some questions to come in. I've got plenty of different topics to cover today. The first one was, you know, there's obviously always a real interest in RAW versus JPEG, because those are the two camera or file formats that are in most cameras that you can select from. And most people realize that a RAW contains a lot more information than a JPEG, and most professionals, well, nearly all professionals would choose to shoot RAW. I certainly do. But we're making a new tutorial at the moment, and in it I wanted to test this RAW versus JPEG, and I had quite a bit of fun doing so, and I'm going to reveal the tests here. So here on my laptop I've got a RAW file, which this one's actually a Nikon RAW file, and then there's the JPEG file of the same image. Now what's really interesting here is if I pull the exposure up on the RAW file, I've pulled that up to 1.95. Look how much detail has dragged out the shadows. Now let's do that on the JPEG file, and I'll pull the JPEG file up and I get it up to 1.95, and yet it doesn't look quite the same. That's the first thing. You see, it hasn't pulled the same amount of detail. So I have to pull it up further, and in pulling it up further, you start to see a little bit more detail, but it still hasn't got the same smoothness as the RAW file.
The highlights have also
exactly.
blown a
The
lot
highlights
more
have blown a lot more.
face.
Now what's really interesting is if I pull this way up to get the detail in there, you'll notice you can see this really strong amount of pixelation in the eye there. I don't know if I can go, I don't think I can go in any more magnification, but if we compare that, and if I pull this one up, which is the RAW file, and I pull this up even more, that pixelation does not occur. And then we look at it in the JPEG file, we can see there's a lot of blockiness and artifacts created by the JPEG. And if I pull the shadow end up of the file, you can start to see even more apparent blocking, and that's that JPEG. You know, that's how JPEGs compress an image, is they get sections of an image that are similar tones and they cluster them together, basically block pixels together, lump them together, and that reduces file size. That's the whole purpose of a JPEG. But if you're very concerned about image detail, and here I'm going to pull the shadow up as well, you can see that this has no blockiness whatsoever, and we've pulled out more detail out of those shadows than was achievable with the JPEG. And there's this constant argument between some photographers about RAW versus JPEG, and clearly the RAW file has got something extra. The interesting thing is though, you can still actually pull quite a bit out of the JPEG. So if you're a photographer who's having to shoot thousands of PR event images or wedding images or that, then maybe JPEG is your best choice if you're not having to grade the images tremendously. Let's go the other way on the file. So we go back to the correct exposure there, and we can see that the skin tones are actually, there's no blown out highlights here anyway to worry about. But no, I think that that exercise, oh no, that was it, that was the other thing. Let me zoom out on the image, and let me zoom out on this one as well. Color balance, this was the important one. If you change the color temperature of this image quite dramatically on the RAW, let me pull the exposure up a bit, let me put the highlights back to normal. You can see that the color balance is kind of overall, but if I do that same amount of color balance on the JPEG, it goes all patchy.
Yeah, it doesn't do a nice even
It doesn't do an even change.
Yeah,
because obviously the data isn't there. So it's quite interesting as well, you know. So I'll put it over to the warm tones on the JPEG, put it over to the warm tones on the, so there's a certain smoothness in the RAW file
Yes.
The JPEG loses when we adjust that color balance quite dramatically. So, so that's another reason for shooting RAW, is that whole, you know, what color balance setting should I use, Kelvin temperature should I use, and then knowing if you're shooting RAW, you can adjust that afterwards anyway, and it doesn't really matter. So hopefully that's a good little indicator of that RAW versus JPEG comparison there, and that's just using Lightroom. And we've got a new free course coming out soon, which is going to be available on our website, that is part of anyway. So look out for that, guys. Right, now we'll take some questions, but I've still got a couple of things I want to talk about first, because I wanted to talk about these. Do you know what this is?
I do.
What is it? What is that?
That is the little thing you'll put.
What's it called? Begins with
a gobo.
A gobo, that's right, yes. This is a gobo, and this one is from Rosco. Rosco are, I think they're an American company. They make lighting, filtration, gels, and they make these gobos. And the reason I came across these is because there's a light behind you. You see it? There, right. Now I did a video recently. Here it is here. And this video is on YouTube, and it's an explanation of specialist studio lighting, including the Pulso Spot 4. Now this video is all about these very particular, specific lights that we use to do specific product photography, specific fashion photography, lights that have very fine control over spots of light or shapes of light, or, you know, very specific details that are very specialist. And this video had a lot of people were very pleased to see this video. I know we get a lot of people say, oh, you know, how can I do this on a budget? But there are obviously a lot of professionals that would like to know about this, you know, higher end equipment.
Professional. Yeah.
Now, one of the interesting things is that particular light, I can probably scrub through it. That particular light, as you'll see here in the video, it uses these gobos that go into the lamp. As a matter of fact, I think you might see one there, and it projects an image of that onto whatever. So as a matter of fact, there I'm using it in that shot there, but you can project images. Now the light itself only comes with about 3 or 4 of these, and I was struggling to find out where to get hold of them. And then it turns out that Rosco make them for theatre lights, and they're exactly the right size for that light. That is brilliant.
It's amazing when things work out like that.
Yeah, so I reached out to Rosco, and here's the Rosco Catalog. They have got thousands and thousands of these gobos, not just like window type pictures, but all sorts of patterns. They've even got glass ones with images on, so you can put slides in, all sorts of
flags, birds.
Everything.
Oh, they must be American.
Yeah,
They've got an eagle in the flag.
Yeah, there's just tons and tons of these gobos, but in particular, the ones that interest me are these window type chateau window ones, because these are great for projecting as images onto models, beauty, or product work. And they've got tons of them, and they are really quite inexpensive as well. So thanks to Gobo for sending me some samples
Rosco.
of these. Not Gobo.
Thank you to Rosco for sending your gobos.
Exactly. Thank you to Rosco for sending these Gobo samples. I'm definitely going to be ordering some more. But if you're a photographer who's been using the Pulso Spot 4 projection attachment, and you've been thinking, where can I get some of these? Well, there you go. Rosco does tons of them, and just by chance, they happen to fit that fitting of that light.
Perfect.
Should we take some questions before I stop rambling on?
We do. We just have 4.
Let's go with those.
The first one is from Raw Tom saying, "Hi Carl, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
If I look at anybody who is using Hasselblad, they are using Canon as a second body. I'm just curious why. Is there a reason, or is it just coincidence?"
Look at that. Why
there's
chance?
a Canon.
There's a Canon.
And there's a Hasselblad.
And there's a Hasselblad on the desk. And there is also a Sony. Now, we didn't know that question was coming. These were on the desk anyway, because we were using them for something else before. No, it's just pure chance. I've been a Canon user, or I was a Canon user. I still am a Canon user, I guess, from 1991. No, earlier actually. I started on the Canon T70 body, which you won't even know.
No.
Funny old manual no, and then I had the Canon F1, another manual camera. Then I had the T90. Then the EOS range was launched. So back then it was all manual focus. Then the EOS range was launched, and there was a camera also called the T90 that looks very, very similar to today's EOS cameras. As a matter of fact, pretty much every camera in the EOS lineup is kind of similar in many ways to the shaping of the T90.
Oh, it is, yeah.
You see? And the T90 was well ahead of its time. It was called state of the art at the time because it was one of these cameras that had spot metering in it, and they hadn't done spot metering in a camera. It had a fast motor wind for winding the film on and taking pictures quickly, all of those things. So it became a really popular camera. So I had one of those. And then the natural progression is you just stick with the brand you use. But in saying that, I've used Minolta, I've used Nikon, I've used other brands. I've used in medium format, Mamiya, Sinar, been with Hasselblad for many years now using their brands. But no, I don't think there's any reason photographers use Canon. It's probably just out of the 35mm brands, it is probably the most popular, successful one. I think they've got about 60% of the market, and then the rest of the market is split between Nikon, Olympus, etc. So it's more likely that people are going to be using Canon because they've got the biggest market share. But I will say, having used the Sonys recently,
yes,
they're bloody good. They're very good. I'm just not a big fan of the electronic viewfinder. I still can't get my head around that. But I got to say, the images they turn out is pretty good.
Okay, Mohit or Mohi is wanting to know. I really wanted to know how did you shoot that color splash shoot in which many of the colors are splashing from a cylindrical container? So I think the paint splash shot.
You think who said that? Mohit. Think, Mohit, do you really think I am going to give away that information right now, free of charge, no questions asked? How on earth did I do this shoot? Where is it gone? I assume here we're going from that shot there, and how did I make that do that? Well, Mohit, that's a very, very good question. And if you want to know how, head over to karltayloreducation.com and watch the whole video on how it was done.
Everything, you answer all the questions
exactly,
there.
Exactly.
Okay, Darren says, hi Karl, are you going to be teaching at any of the associations soon? I would love to see you. So for example, Master Photographer Association events, the societies, conventions.
No.
We keep him too busy here.
Yeah, the last one I did the societies in January, year before last. Hasselblad asked me to do a guest thing, and I did that. And I've done a couple in the past at the photography show. But no, generally speaking, I'm too busy often. We do run workshops here in Guernsey in our studio here. Our next one is with Tim Flack in March. Tim Flack, the fine art and animal photographer. We've got a really good workshop on the the more theoretical aspects of photography, but a lot of practical photography, some horses and animal photography and product photography and all sorts going on there as well. But no, unfortunately, I might show up at one of these shows now and again. Last presentation I did was at Photokina last year for Manfrotto. I did a 40-minute talk for them about photography. So you'll see me occasionally at these shows, but no current plans at the moment to be at any in particular, I'm afraid.
George Monahan is saying, what do you think of the new Photoshop updates?
I haven't looked at it yet, to be honest, George. So I can't answer that. I don't know what the new tools are, what the new things are. I will look at them because we produce Photoshop tutorials that go really in detail on the stuff. But to be absolutely honest, for me as a photographer and as a retoucher, and most retouchers will tell you this as well, there's only a few things we're interested in. Hue, saturation and luminance, that's the three things that control everything. And most of the work we do is burn and dodge. And burn and dodge is changing, lightening and darkening certain areas of the picture selectively, just like we did in the dark room. And then color work. And that color work can be done with hue saturation layers. I don't do any cloning other than a little bit of cleanup work. I don't generally cut things out and repaste them and do all that sort of stuff. If you want to see that, there's a guy called Erik Johansson, who's a sort of surreal artist photographer. He's going to be a guest on our talk show. He is incredible at doing that
his stuff is amazing. He even has a lot of behind the scenes stuff which shows you a little bit of what goes into the project, and you realize just how much is actually involved in it. So
yeah,
he's
but what
really
I like about what he does is that he spends ages planning and pre-visualizing and sketching and considering that if he's going to shoot that component and it needs to go with this component, then he must shoot this component in the same lighting. So it's very thought out process and very well done. For me, my work is normally one shot and then just burn and dodge and coloration work to it. So I actually use very little repertoire of the Photoshop tools, because for the type of work I do, as I say, burn and dodge and coloration. That doesn't mean to say I don't know the tools, and I will certainly be investigating some of the new tools, but unfortunately at this stage I haven't had a chance.
Not yet. Fispin is asking, is it worth the change from the H5D50C Wi-Fi to the X1D Mark II? Also, will it work at 1/2000th if I upgrade the lens of the H system?
Yeah, the H system lenses, pass the Hasselblad please. So this is one of the older lenses on it. On the new lenses, they've got an orange square. If they've got an orange square on the lens, that means it's one of the new lenses and the new leaf shutters, and it can sync at 1/2000th of a second, and that should be applicable to your CMOS 50C H60. So it was a H6?
H5.
H5. Not 100% sure on the H5, certainly on the H6, but you'd have to check with Hasselblad on that. But I think it's certainly, I think the new lenses is what helps it, but there may be something in the electronics of the H6 that also contributes to that, so I can't say for sure. The X1D2, I'm pretty sure yes, because that's a whole new system, new lenses, new design. The reports that I've read in terms of lens quality is that actually the X series, the X camera, is turning out better, sharper images than even some of the H lenses, because they're more new. They've been designed from scratch. The whole system's new. The difference for me though is I use the Hasselblad 100 megapixel, and the modularity of the system suits my type of workflow better, as does the 100 megapixel. And they have been revamping some of the lenses in the H lineup as well, but I think because the X1D2 and the X1D1 were so popular, they put a lot of their focus into that.
Okay, Baraka is wanting to know, how can they remove ketchup stains using Photoshop?
Well, the interesting that actually, Baraka, because the first thing is to realise it's not a ketchup stain. That's the most important thing. Now, let's say that it's a ketchup stain on Ashley's grey jumper. Then it's not a ketchup stain when it's in Photoshop in an image. What it is you've got a two-dimensional image that is made up of lots and lots of little pixels, squares, and each one of those squares represents a unit of colour and a unit of luminosity. So you simply have to take those areas of luminosity and change them and change the colour. Now, if many people will think, well, I'll just clone it, and that could be a good way to do, but if it's on a shirt, you might lose texture. So you can think about it other ways. You could select the area, and then you could drop the saturation out, especially if it was on a grey or a white top, because that's not colour. So you could drop the saturation out. Then you'll be left with a luminosity issue, because the red ketchup will be darker than the rest. So then you'd have to look at selecting those pixels and using curves to lighten those pixels to bring them to the same luminosity values, maybe burn and dodge. Now, it can be quite fiddly to the point that it's actually easier just to use a patch tool or a clone tool and just sample over it, or cut out another piece of shirt or jumper or whatever it is that's similar, and then remove that on a new layer and paste it over the top of the stain. Obviously, I can't see the job you're talking about, but that is how I would do it, how it comes to mind for me. Now, just before you continue, let's just take a quick look at something else. It is competition time. We have our December competition, and because it's December and Santa is coming, Santa is bringing a Cirrus Lighting Kit worth $3,400. There it is. Look at that Cirrus Lighting Kit. As a matter of fact, I've got one here. Yeah. This isn't the one that we're giving away, but this is a Cirrus Lighting Kit. Let me open it up, and hopefully I don't drop the Cirrus lights out onto the floor. There we are. There's a Cirrus Lighting Kit. Look, and there's a couple of Cirrus lights in there. There's one. There's another one on the other side there. Now, we give that away as a prize. Not this one, though. It'll be a brand new one in a box. We give that away as a prize in our competitions. Well, we give it away every 6 months.
Yep.
In between that, we give away other prizes that aren't as valuable as that.
Oh, we have a Canon that we give away every now and then.
We have a Canon 5D Mark IV we've given away as well in the past. But this December, competition theme is architecture. So if you've got great architecture images, get them sent in. Closing date is 9th of December, and we will be announcing the winner of that competition before Christmas. So someone will be getting a nice Christmas present. Second prize is Lee Filters Super Stopper. Third prize is Lee Filters Foundation Kit. There's the competition details on there. There's some of our past competition winners, and we've got, I think you've done a blog post or something about that.
Yeah.
So if you want to enter that competition, head over to karltayloreducation.com. You will find the competition section in the My Account button dropping down from there. Also, if you want to learn more about architectural photography, there's a great talk show with Sean Comboy, who's a professional architectural photographer, where he gives his insights on our talk show about his work and how he shoots architectural photography, how he approaches it. On one of our guest talk shows like that. So we have loads of amazing guests on our talk show, and he was one of them. So architecture competition, deadline December the 9th. Over to you, Ash.
Okay, next question is from Russell Tracy Photography, and they're wanting to know if you have any recommendations or suggestions on the older Hasselblad camera models, so like the H3, H4, for use with portrait or commercial work, or would you stay with one of the newer models like the H5, X1D or X1D Mark II?
Well, I suppose it comes down to budget, because at the end of the day...
Doesn't it always?
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to want the latest model. I certainly like to have the latest model. I started on the H1, then I moved to H3, I skipped the H2, then I traded, got H4, and then I did get H5, and then I did get H6. Now, as an ambassador for Hasselblad in the last few years, I get a bit of a deal on my Hasselblads, but I still have to pay for them, and I still have to do the trade up and all the rest of it. Now, the question is how much budget you can allocate to it, because for me, I found the H6 so much more reliable and solid than the H5. H5 was a good camera. It was the CCD version I had. The 50 megapixel, but it was a bit quirky sometimes, a bit temperamental.
Quirky is a nice way.
So the H6 has been really solid. So I suppose, you have to keep that in mind. But then on a budget side, I've seen some of the H3s, H4s and H5 going for knockdown low prices secondhand at the moment. So, that obviously is tempting, isn't it, to save money in that respect. But the X1D2 has come down in price dramatically as well. So I think you've got to weigh up the pricing advantages. And in terms of whether you'd prefer an X1D over a H series camera is a lot to do with portability and the way you're going to work, and whether you like looking through an electronic viewfinder or whether you prefer looking through a real prism. So those are the things you're going to have to weigh up. But I would say before you make a purchasing decision of that value, for a H series or whatever, go and rent one for a week. Try it out. Go into a camera shop and play around with them, or go to a couple of trade shows and check them out, because it's a serious investment. If you're buying a car,
you wouldn't just go buy it.
You wouldn't just go and buy it. No, you go and test drive a car.
Whether it's new or second-hand, a new model, older model, yeah.
Exactly right. New or second-hand, you'd give it a test drive. You'd want to take it for a spin. Exactly the same when we're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars of camera equipment.
Okay, next question is from Vidyarda. As a commercial photographer in DSLR, what should I select, sRGB or Adobe RGB, and why? Adobe RGB for sure. You're talking about the gamut space of color that's available to you. The Adobe RGB gamut is bigger than the sRGB gamut. Although the sRGB gamut is often what's used for the images that are finally displayed online, or what goes through a RIP on an Epson printer, etc., etc.,
During the post-production stage, you don't want to limit the colors available to you by only working the sRGB gamut, and you don't want to limit the colors captured either. So work in the bigger gamut of Adobe RGB, do all the work you need, and then the printers or whoever web people will convert to sRGB at the last stage. But if you've been working in the sRGB gamut all the way through, you're restricting the amount of play you've got. This is especially important for commercial photographers like myself, who I shoot a lot of commercial images, product images that are destined for magazines or posters, and all of those are produced on lithographic presses using CMYK. That's cyan, magenta, yellow, and the K stands for black, so it doesn't get confused with B for blue. And in those processes, the pre-press people convert the RGB image into CMYK. And they'd much rather do that from an Adobe RGB file than an sRGB file. So Adobe RGB all the way. Even to the point that in my camera, I've got Adobe RGB set in there. And then obviously when I bring that into Photoshop, it's the Adobe RGB profile I go to. And if accidentally, for whatever reason, I get a file from someone that wants some work on it, and it's not in Adobe RGB, I'll convert it to the Adobe RGB space 16-bit before I even start work on it. Okay, let's go again.
Okay, next question is from Zhao. While shooting products and food, we need to capture faithfully the aspects of the subject. What are the do's and don'ts while shooting these subjects?
It's a bit of a broad question, isn't it?
It is quite a large one. The do's and the don'ts, though.
Well, read the question again if you don't mind.
So while shooting products and food, so anything really, we need to capture faithfully the aspects of the subject.
Yeah, there's the first point.
What are the do's and don'ts?
Well, the first do is you need to capture faithfully the aspects of the subject, is what you've just said and identified yourself. Now, the aspects of the subject are its attributes. What's important about it? What does the client want to show? What is it actually that the product does that needs to be demonstrated? Remember, a commercial image is really an infomercial. It's something that has to describe something that something does so that it becomes desirable to a potential customer and they want to buy it. So for example, if you were going to buy a new car, you'd be very disappointed if the website for the car only showed you the back end of the car, didn't show you what the front looked like.
I would be, yes,
okay?
yeah.
So it's obvious there that the person buying the car wants to know what the car looks like from the front end. They probably want to know what the back looks like too, but most importantly, the first image they're going to want to see is the front. They're also not going to want to see that car dead front on, because that doesn't give enough information or description about the product either. They're going to want to see a bit of the front and a bit of the side and things like that. So immediately, based on the product itself, whether it's a pair of glasses, whether it's a mobile phone, a car, whatever, there are certain things you're going to identify which will dictate the angle of view you need to shoot it at. And a lot of photographers lack confidence in knowing, oh, should I go a bit higher, should I go a bit low, should I go there, should I there? I'm afraid you've got to work that out. That is the job of you or the art director that you're working with to decide what's important. And then once you've decided that, you put 1,000,000,000% into lighting it so that all of the best attributes come out from there. Now, all of that process that I've just described works better when we pre-visualize it. So we draw up some sketches, we spend some time analyzing the product, looking at the product, looking at its attributes, thinking about which bit needs to be lit more carefully, what different surfaces and textures. And you have to ask yourself all of the questions and then solve the problems. So it's a very methodical, logical, scientific almost approach to completing the project. That's the best way of doing it.
Cool. Martin Poole is asking a very good question. When are you going to demo a fashion beach shoot?
Martin. We love Martin.
Good question.
Good question, Martin. Take a look at this, Martin. This, by the way, is my Squarespace website, which uses the Wells template. I get that question a lot. This is the Wells template that I've got going here. Now, I have to just put out a shout to Squarespace. They kindly sponsor this episode of our live Q&A on social media. Squarespace websites, I love them. I use one, as you can see here, for my commercial work. They give really high quality, detailed images that are easy to upload. It works on any size, any platform, mobile devices. I've got all my own galleries that I can update and change here as quickly as I like. I can add in text files, information, loads of other assets and attributes. I've even got some video elements in here in my galleries as well. So really love Squarespace websites. This is the Wells template if you're interested. And if you want to save 10% on your own Squarespace website, use the offer code Karl, K-A-R-L, at checkout. You get a 14-day free trial first. Did I throw that in seamlessly?
Perfectly. We didn't even notice the change in
topic. Didn't even notice. Now, who was it? Martin.
Yes.
Right, let's jump back to Martin. Right, Martin asked about shooting fashion or beauty images.
Fashion on the beach.
On the beach, right. How about this for you, Martin? Look at that one. Now this, I was really pleased with these images. Not only, we had to overcome a lot of challenges because
we're glad you were pleased with the results.
Yeah, we had Ashley stood as a demo model in the sea in a wetsuit for the first test shots. We had guys on lighting stood on rocks, some stood in the sea, and we had our beautiful model Karis there getting blasted in hurricane winds.
And she was.
And I wanted to do this series of shots where it was almost getting dark and combining these long exposures with flash lighting as well. And this was another image that I shot as well.
Poor Georgie had to lay in the water before that one.
Well, Georgie, our other colleague here at work, she had to lay in the water, but she had a wetsuit on.
She did. We were all much more fortunate than poor Karis. Yeah. She had to work really hard.
Karis didn't have a wetsuit. She had a wetsuit on her legs there under that, but she had to lie down in that cold coastal puddle there in the rocks. And we filmed the entire shoot, all the tribulations, the setup, the makeup, the styling, the whole getting on location and doing it all. And then on day 2, it was a howling gale.
Yeah.
And it was really hard work. I mean, it definitely required some assistance. But in answer to Martin's question, those tutorials will be coming out on karltayloreducation.com in the new year at some point. Let's just go back to that. Yeah, there's the picture there. See that picture? Interesting. The idea behind that shot comes from John Everett Milias's painting of Ophelia. That painting's called, from 1851. And it's a very famous painting. And that's kind of where I got the inspiration from for that shot there.
I didn't actually know that story behind the image.
So yeah, it's a very, very famous painting. And so you can see the sort of similarities. But what I wanted to do in the stills images here was sort of use that sort of timing of light going into dark and water meeting land and all these other elements to it. And I really enjoyed that shoot. So coming soon on Karl Taylor Education. Okay,
Kushik is wanting to know, oh no, I've missed one, sorry. Christian is saying, is there more formats off of RAW?
No,
sure what they mean
no, there are different RAW formats. So you have RAW, and then you have each camera manufacturer has its own proprietary format. So with Canon, it's CR2 files. With Nikon, it's NEF files. With Hasselblad, it's 3FR, etc., etc. And Sony's are called something else. So they've all got their own RAW file format, which means they've got their own algorithms for processing color. They've usually got their own proprietary software for processing the images as well, except people like Adobe that have Lightroom and Photoshop, they also have the algorithms to translate any of those RAW files and work on them as well. And then on top of that, there's another RAW file called DNG, which is kind of like a universal RAW file format. And it was something that was introduced many years ago, and they were going to hopefully adopt it as a universal standard across all the cameras, but they didn't want to do that. They all ended up with their own RAW file format. So yes, there are different RAW file formats. But if you're ever stuck, like for example, Capture One won't allow you to process Hasselblad files in their software because Capture One have got phase, so they've got that competition. And then some of the Canon ones won't let you do this, that, and the other. But the Photoshop RAW processor will let you process any of them because they don't give a crap about the different cameras. They just want you to be able to edit the images. And actually, the Adobe RAW processing engine in Photoshop is very good. I really like it.
Okay, next question is Kushik. Please tell me which is the best Nikon, the Z6 or the D750?
No idea. I don't know anything, I'm afraid, about that sort of techie, which camera's best, blah, blah, blah. I know which is the best camera in the world and which camera delivers me the best results. That's it. But all the other sort of brands, I've experimented a bit with Sony. I used a Nikon D850 a while ago, really loved it, great image files. But he said a Z.
A Z6.
Don't even know what it is, I'm afraid.
Or a D750.
So I'm sorry. We are not one of those type of YouTube channels or education providers that educates about gear. We educate about technique. So, you know, the techniques apply across all camera brands and formats. We deal with technique here and the art of photography, not the geeky, nerdy bit.
I don't know, have you heard yourself speak about light?
Yes, you're right. I speak about light in a nerdy way.
Shivam is wanting to know what is the difference between professional or semi-professional cameras?
I thought he was going to say photographers then. I can tell you what the difference between those are. Between semi-professional and professional cameras. Well, I don't know. I mean, that's just a phrase that the manufacturer's thrown on it. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, if the camera can deliver high quality results, it doesn't matter whether it's got semi-professional badge to it or professional badge. It's just what you need to fulfill your needs. So if you're a wildlife photographer, you're going to want something that shoots 10 frames a second, or a sports photographer. But like me, my Hasselblad shoots like 1 frame per second. So no use whatsoever for wildlife, but then totally suited for what I do in the studio for product, beauty or fashion. You know, there's so many different things. The only thing you need to concentrate on with any camera is the sensor. Has it got a good sensor? I prefer full frame sensors and medium format obviously as well. So has it got a good sensor? Can it deliver pretty good images at higher ISOs as well, like 800, 1600 ISO? And then additionally, can you use it in manual mode? Those are the key things, because that's all I do is work in manual mode. I don't use any of the autofocus modes. I don't use any of the metering modes. I just use the camera in manual, shutter speed control, aperture control, and the sensor records a good image. The only thing I would say, or the thing that's most important, is put some good glass on the front of it, you know? So if you buy, say for instance, what you might call a semi-professional, like the 7D Canon, I think it is, it's a full frame sensor, records a great 22 megapixel image, but just buy some good glass. You'd be better buying good glass. If you only had X amount of budget, like say $5,000, you'd be better buying a cheaper body that delivers the same image and better glass than wasting your money on all the features on a body, such as 20,000 focus points and this ridiculous frames per second and all that, because you probably never use some of that stuff.
It sounds good.
Sounds good.
That's all it is.
Sounds good in the marketing brochure.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it won't deliver you a better quality image. The glass will, though.
Yes.
So there you go. Right.
Okay, Connor is saying, so I am new to using strobe lights.
Flash means?
Strobe lights and lights at all, so yes.
I think Americans call them strobe lights. But we
Flash,
call them
then.
flash. That's a studio light that bursts some light out, or a speed light that bursts some light out. The difference is a studio light, like these ones behind us, they have a modelling light which is on, so you can see what you're doing, and then it fires the flash. Right, but anyway.
So they purchased a newer Vision 4. When it comes to getting started with lighting, is it okay to start cheap, or should I spend the money on higher quality lighting?
It depends on how far you're going to go with it, to be honest, you know. You know, if you buy the most expensive lighting like Srgb packs and, you know, Pulso G-lamp heads and all the rest of it, you'll have stuff that's way beyond your requirements. If you bought something like a Cirrus broncolor light, you'll have something that's really, really high spec, a little bit more expensive than most of the other brands, and it'll do everything you're probably going to need. But then you might decide 3-4 years down the line, oh, I wish I didn't go for monoblocks because they're too heavy in my umbrella light up there. I wish I'd gone for smaller lamp heads that were powered off a pack. You won't know this stuff until you learn more about photography. So in many ways, I would say, yeah, it might be a better idea to go cheap, use that for a few years, but the key thing is the modifiers as well, is thinking about the modifiers, because you have to buy a lot of modifiers, softboxes, umbrellas and all these different things, you know, are you going to be able to use those on other brands, or are you going to be able to use those if you up-spec your lights? You know, there's a lot of things. I mean, there's lots of lighting brands. I'm a Broncolor user. Previously, I was an Elinchrom user. A lot of good talk about Godox light as well lately, but then a lot of talk also about reliability on that as well sometimes. And there's the difference. You know, whilst the Godox might deliver fast flash duration, will it deliver consistent flash results to 1/20th of an f-stop on every burst of flash, which might be needed if you're doing product photography and layering image files? And will it work if you kick it down the stairs? Because like the other day on the live show, I wellied over the Srgb pack, didn't I? Just booted it over. And I've done that several times and it won't affect it whatsoever. I could drop that down a few flights of stairs, probably be fine. I'm not sure I could say that about every other brand of lights. So you have to think about durability. If this stuff's just going to be sat in your garage, using it in a small studio, and you're not going to kick it around or using it in professional format, then yeah, probably save yourself some money, familiarise yourself with the kit. And again, don't disregard renting kit for a week or two. Give it a try, test it out. That's always a good way to go.
Okay, Shivam has another question. Does the Canon 6D Mark II have a panoramic feature? Can it take panoramic images?
Do you know?
I don't know, but what I can say is that you can make it take it by just creating your own panoramic image in Photoshop.
Absolutely.
So even if it doesn't.
Yeah, even if it doesn't. We don't know if it does, and I would say that it's probably far more efficient for you to do a Google search for something like that, because I'm pretty sure the answer will come up straight away. And as I said, we're not sort of the camera nerdy end here, we're more the art and technique. But as Ashley just said, I mean, click here, click there, Photoshop or Lightroom can do panoramic blends easily for you. That's how we do them.
Okay, then Becca is saying, any comments on the new tethering options for the X1D Mark II?
I don't think there's any new tethering options. It's always been a tetherable camera into focus software in the same way that the Hasselblad is tethered with a, what do you call it, a USB-C cable, which gives a very fast transfer speed. So even with my 100 megapixel camera, tethers the shots into focus. The X1D does the same. It always has done, because even when I had the test model X1D, when we were doing some instructional videos for Hasselblad, I used it tethered and it worked fine. So I don't know about any new thing, but it's always been able to be tethered using Focus, which is the proprietary software from Hasselblad for their raw file format.
We have quite a few more gear questions. I don't know if you want to run through them.
Well, you decide, not me. You're the adjudicator here on whether it should get asked or not.
I'm afraid
it has to get past Ashley first.
Yeah, I don't think we'll be able to help them with those two
questions.
While
you're looking,
so I'll skip them.
You have a look. I'm going to talk about this. So over here on the website, some brand new food tutorials coming soon. This one on flying tea photography, which we got this flying tea image here. This was quite a clever one that we did with Anna. That's coming this Friday, I think it is, isn't it?
Not this Friday,
the one after.
Friday.
And then on top of that, we've got some great new post-production tutorials. We've been releasing these mini tutorials on how to use curves, how to use masks, selection. We just released how to use the pen tool, but we've got creating your own actions. And these little mini tutorials are going down really, really well because they just focus on specific tools in Photoshop, which people seem to be enjoying. And this one here, look, I remove a person from a photo. So I remove the whole body, head, face, everything, and rebuild the photo as well. So some more specific direct use tools, those are all coming out soon on Karl Taylor Education. Have you found a question?
I have. We've got Decoy, who wants to know, what did you call the modifiers you mentioned in the beginning of this discussion? So
well, that one over, where is it? There. That one is a projection, Pulso Spot 4 projection attachment. So it's basically got a projecting lens on it, and then it's got a lamp flash inside. So it can project a perfect circle of light, and you can refocus the projector so you can make that light softer at the edges. So you can make beautiful spotlights. Then you put gobo blades in it so that you can change the shape of the light. So I can make a really thin slither of light, a triangle, a square. But then further to that, instead of gobo blades, you can actually put a gobo in, and then it can project an image of something like a window. So if I had a model standing just, you know, against a white wall, I could project what looked like the light from a chateau window falling onto her face, and then I can either have that light or that shadow pin sharp, or I can defocus the lens to soften the shadow so it looks like that she might be a little bit further away from the window, because as the shadows move further away, they get softer on the edges. So that's what these gobos are for creating those type of looks. So that was a pulso spot for projection light. And then there are also the smaller projection attachment lights that they do as well. And there are a couple of other brands that do projection attachments as well. Oh, my phone's ringing. I've got to turn that off. Go away. We're busy.
Next question.
My mate, Gilby, trying to get hold of me, wanting to know where we're diving this weekend.
Oh,
right.
in this weather.
Yeah, it's meant to be okay on Sunday. Right.
Alex wants to know if you know if there is a flash and trigger that works with Canon and Sony.
A flash and trigger. Well, most of the flash manufacturers have their own triggers, and then even for speed lights now there are triggers that will work, and I'm pretty sure that Godox do a trigger that works on their speed lights and their flash units as well. I don't know the ins and outs. I mean, every flash manufacturer, certainly Studio Flash, whether it's Bowens, Broncolor, Elinchrom, they have their own triggers that you put on top of the camera that will trigger the lights. How universal they are. Oh, there was one called Pocket Wizard. There was a brand called Pocket Wizard that you could reprogram the frequencies to work with pretty much any speed light that had the radio frequency thing. But you obviously need the right type of speed light or flash that has got that built in it. But Pocket Wizard could be one.
Okay, Anna is saying, hi Karl and Ashley. As you said once, Karl, to start working as a photographer, one should first achieve certain quality. I agree, but as a perfectionist, I see that my images are not perfect. But where is the minimum quality to start with, or is there no minimum quality? And should I start working only if I can say my pictures are perfect?
No. There's always a minimum quality, and the minimum quality that the market will dictate, and the market being your potential customers. So when I started as a commercial photographer, when I first started in my studio back in 97, I think it was. I was a photographer for before that in photojournalism, but I didn't start my own studio till about 97. Now, my work is a long way away from what it was then to what it is now, because I know a lot more, but it was to a certain standard that people would pay me to shoot product images, etc., etc., because I'd had done time assisting other photographers, so I'd learned, you know, my trade to get me to a certain level. So was I able to turn out competent images that were suitable for a catalogue or a brochure, etc.? Yes, I was. Would the client buy them? Yes, they did. If they weren't to a certain standard, the type of commercial clients would just have said, no, that's not good enough. So I think the market will dictate whether or not your work is good enough. Is the work that I shoot now comparable to the work I shot then? No. The work I shoot now is very much more polished, I would say, not in Photoshop, but just the way I go about it, the way I light things, the knowledge I've acquired since back then, 25 years ago, is very different. But that doesn't mean to say, no, you shouldn't start. But I think what you should at least do is look at your competitors in your market area or the market that you're trying to target and make a conscious decision, is your work at least as good as your competition? Because if it isn't, then you're probably not going to get any work anyway, unless, for example, a given client is willing to accept a massive drop in quality for a massive drop in price. But that doesn't really happen very often. What you have to think about with commercial clients, most commercial clients will always look for the best deal, but they won't look for the, you know, they still have to have a certain level of quality because they've got a product that they're trying to sell. And if what they turn out is rubbish, then they're not going to sell what they want to sell. So, you know, there's always this sort of baseline standard based on what the market. It's always a supply and demand thing. So evaluate your competition and let that be your benchmark, I would guess.
Okay, Winnie223, do you have a few words on choosing and checking second-hand lenses? So again, they want do's and don'ts.
We have got a video on our YouTube channel. Search on our YouTube channel, checking secondhand lenses. You'll find that video useful, but it's the usual simple things. Does it rattle too much? Does something sound loose inside it? When you look through it, does it look clean? Is there lots of dust inside it? Is it going to need cleaning? Specifically look for fungus in the lenses. You have this sort of hair-like growth growing on some of the glass and the elements, usually on the front or rear element, but sometimes inside as well if it's been left in damp storage conditions. Those are things that would have to be rectified if you bought that lens. So, you know, the other thing is the general appearance, and same when you buy a second-hand car. If it's got dents all over it and bashes and everything, the same applies if the lens hood's got loads of dents and the barrel of the lens has got loads of dents and bashes. You know it's taken a few knocks. Therefore, there's a possibility that the elements, remember there's like several different pieces of glass in a lens, one of those might be out of alignment that's going to cause you focusing problems, aberration issues, etc. So it's, you know, common sense stuff.
Okay, Ian is saying, I have been loaned a Hasselblad X1D for a couple of weeks. I only have a couple of standard flash guns with remote triggers. I can only get the flash at shutter speeds below 1/100th. Any idea why?
No, none at all. I don't know why. I don't know why. I would have thought it wouldn't be a problem unless the X1D lenses don't have a leaf shutter in, which I'm not sure. I think they may not. But if they don't, then you can use the H adapter and put the H lenses on it, and then that would work as well. So I'm afraid you'll have to take that up with your retailer or your dealer.
Zhao is referring back to the question that they asked earlier, which was the one about food and product photography.
Yeah.
What are the do's and don'ts? They said they would like to know the do's and don'ts in Photoshop in post-production.
Don't do any post-production. Shouldn't need to.
Do maybe minimal if you couldn't get all the dust off.
Minimal.
Clean it up.
Clean up bits and bobs, obviously, on a product shot, right? If we take a product shot, let me go into my product gallery. So that shot there has no Photoshop work except for burning and dodging, which is essentially contrast changes, okay? So it's caught in camera like that. The majority of that shot there, we did that one as a live show, the majority of that headphones was caught in camera. We did a separate shot for the shadow, because we used a different lighting for the shadow, but the majority of the lighting and everything was done all in camera. All that we did was sort of a little bit of saturation on the gold, burn and dodge work. Your Photoshop work on any product shot, that one there's pretty much clean out of camera as well. Your Photoshop work shouldn't be about fixing some terrible rubbish photograph you created. Your Photoshop work should just be for final polishing, coloration, contrast, bit of burn and dodge wherever possible. Now sometimes you need multi-layered images for special effects or whatever, but you shouldn't be using Photoshop as a tool to make the image. You should be getting it as best as possible in camera and using Photoshop as just a finishing tool.
If I could throw in there.
Yes.
I think one of the things that was surprising coming and watching Karl work is how little you rely on post-production. A lot of people would say, oh, I will just fix that in Photoshop. But if you actually take the time to look at the product, don't just take the product and be in a hurry to get it finished. If you actually take the time, you can get it so close to perfect that you'll save yourself hours in post-production.
And it usually saves you time overall, I think, because sometimes the time it takes to fix things is longer than it is to actually try and overcome it with your lighting or reflectors or little mirrors or whatever.
Exactly. M. Clint James, I'm not sure if you answered this earlier, what projector do those gobos work with?
It was the Pulso Spot 4 that they work with.
We have
colour, Pulso Spot 4.
We have Mohammed, who's very happy to join us from Egypt. They have the Nikon D300 and they want to know what is the best mode and lens to take good photos for products.
No, there's no mode.
Manual.
Put it in manual. You can only, you need to learn to use a camera in manual mode so that you control the shutter speed and the aperture. That's it. I mean, there is ISO as well, but for product photography, you'd be using it on the base default 100 ISO or 200, whatever is the default ISO. So you're using it, there's no specific settings. You have to identify what depth of field do I need. If I need a certain depth of field, then I need to shoot at that aperture. And then if I'm shooting at that aperture, I need to put this amount of light to be the correct exposure for that aperture. So don't think of it as there being the best settings on a camera. There are no best settings on a camera. There's only what's best for that given shooting scenario. And if at this stage of your photography learning you don't understand that, then you need to learn the basics of photography to a much higher degree. So head over to karltayloreducation.com and get yourself started there. And then the next phase of learning is learning about lighting, because it doesn't matter, even if you know cameras inside out, you understand exposure, ISO, apertures, depth of field, shutter speed, all the rest of it, even if you've got a good grasp on composition, if you don't understand light, the theoretical elements and the physical elements of light and how to control light and what the modifiers do to control light and why and when you should control light, you're lost. You're going to be lost on product and beauty and fashion photography anyway.
Okay, Craig Scott is saying, do you have any plans to do another landscape course? They really enjoyed the first one and they'd love to see something else.
Yeah, well, we did the travel and landscape course some time ago. We have released quite a few landscape modules on Karl Taylor Education since then, independent landscape. I think we've done 3 or 4 new ones.
I think 4, yeah.
In the last year or so. And yes, we do have plans to do more. But if you haven't seen the more recent ones, they are in our advanced section, I think, in the,
yes, they are.
In the education platform on karltayloreducation.com.
Okay.
We've got 10 more minutes, I think.
Oh, okay. Let me try pick out some good questions then.
Right, while you're picking out some questions, let me just tell the people here about this workshop in March. We ran this workshop in March last year. We're running it again in 2020. It's a 4-day workshop with top animal and fine art photographer Tim Flack. You can watch the video here of last year's workshop. Look, we got a horse in the studio. We had 2 horses in the studio.
And a goat, don't forget the goat.
And I did product photography, we did retouching. That takes place at my studio here. You can learn all about that workshop and Tim's work. There's the full itinerary of the workshop, 4-day workshop taking place next year. We had 15 or 16 wonderful guests last year. We booked them all into a really nice hotel. They all loved the experience, and we're looking forward to running that workshop again. So if you're interested in coming on a physical workshop with myself and one of the world's leading authorities on photography and lighting and fine art, animal photography, join the 2 of us and the other guests here in March.
Okay, we have quite a few good questions, so maybe we can run through them quickly. Curious Soul is asking, besides the money, as you mentioned, what made you switch to commercial and advertising from journalism?
Well, it was the money, actually. So as a photojournalist, you don't make a lot of money. You live a sort of hand-to-mouth existence working on one project to the next, unless you've got a full-time job at something like National Geographic. I'd also, that was one reason, become sort of tired of that sort of existence. But the key thing was my fascination with manipulating light. So when I moved into assisting and assisted other photographers in commercial studios that started to make a bottle of whiskey look good or a car or something look amazing, all of a sudden I was like, wow, is that how they do that? Oh, so they make it look desirable by that and that. And it was almost like all these little, it was like magic tricks, you know? It was almost like this secret reveal of all these special techniques that were used to make things look desirable. And what I became fascinated was how something really boring, like a bottle of whiskey or a bottle of vodka, you pick it up in the supermarket, you wouldn't think twice.
No.
But in the advert, it looks amazing.
Yeah.
And it's that really intrigued me and inspired me. And it was that manipulation of light that I became fascinated with.
Okay, you've kind of answered this, but Corinne would like to know, will you do smaller in-person workshops for basic photography skills ever?
No.
Okay, that was quick.
But I'll tell you what, Corinne, we've got something very interesting coming out in the new year. I can't say any more. There you go.
Cryptic.
Keep an eye out for that.
Okay, Rajiv is saying, what one tip would you give for architectural photography so that they can prep for our competition? Other than watch the live show with Sean Comboy.
Well, that's a good point. You have to think about what architectural photography is. You know, it's got to describe the interior or the exterior of some sort of architectural design. And in those architectural designs, we have elements of aesthetics, lighting, textures, materials. So your image needs to describe that, basically. And the experience of absorbing and enjoying an architectural or environmental space, and I use the word environmental in terms of its environment, the experience of enjoying that in person is far easier because you're in the three-dimensional world, and architects often, they're designing three-dimensional spaces and textures and fabrics, and then you have to translate that information into a two-dimensional photograph. So that is the really difficult part. But the beauty of it and the simplicity of it that I like is that you're already dealing with something that usually looks pretty good. You know, obviously it's really hard to transfer something that looks architecturally appalling into a good photograph. You can't, because it's terrible to begin with. And the old phrase, you can't polish a turd. So therefore, the beauty of it is you've got something quite attractive to work with, but you've got to figure out what's going to describe it the best way, what's going to recreate that three-dimensionality or that sense of space, etc., etc. And one of the things we often do in architectural, and as Sean Conboy explained on the live talk show, is quite often we move things around. You know, we have to move things out of, there's a storm brewing up outside. We have to move things around to suit the photograph that wouldn't work in the real space but doesn't work in the photographic space. So be prepared to move stuff.
So linked to the architectural side, we have a question from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 saying, if you were shooting an interior of a hotel with ugly air conditioning and vents on the ceilings, would you edit them out?
Well, I'd first think about maybe not trying to include them in the photograph to begin with. So always try and look for an angle that might be more flattering. But I think we're going to need an architect here soon, because I reckon the roof's going to come off.
If we cut the live feed without saying goodbye, you know what happened.
Off the studio, possibly. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but there's a hell of a storm kicking up outside. You have to obviously try and look for the best aesthetic, that you don't need to include things, but there are occasions where, you take an architectural picture, there's a nasty, plug on the wall or a thermostat that's just not, so you can easily fudge that out. I think you also have to be careful though, if you start removing things like whole air conditioning and things that would be majorly apparent, that if that was for a hotel brochure or something like that, then someone might arrive and go, hold on a minute, that wasn't in the brochure. So you do need to be conscious of that.
Stuart Anderson is saying, hello Ashley and Karl, as a well-established professional photographer, he's speaking to you obviously, how do you continue to learn new things and push yourself to avoid going stagnant?
Well, I've learned a lot of things from other professional photographers. You pick up bits and pieces. Most of it though is learned from other areas such as cinema, lighting, also more recently, and especially on that workshop that I was talking about, a lot of it has come from neuroscience stuff. So I've put a lot of study into how humans perceive images and how our visual processing systems actually work. Why do we respond to images in a certain way? Why do we find some images more aesthetically pleasing than others? And it's a really interesting thought process. It's a really interesting set of science, and it's quite far removed from photography. And a lot of the photography rules that we're taught about dynamics and composition, actually there are reasons that they work that even many photographers don't understand. They know certain rules, but they don't understand how our visual systems work and how we process information to understand the reasons they work. And now that I've learnt those reasons, I apply it more frequently in my work. And I'm not going to say exactly what they are, because that's the whole topic of the workshop that I run with Tim Flack. And Tim Flack applies these visual principles to his work as well. And you'll see it apparent in his work that they've got this certain quality about them that makes you go, why does that look so interesting? If you want to learn more about that, then get yourself on our workshop in March next year, and I'll reveal everything.
It's a good workshop, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, we're really running out of time. We'll take 2 more questions.
Okay, 2 more questions. The first one being, Stuart wants to know, could you explain a little bit more about the mentorship offering that is included in the lifetime plan?
Okay, so the lifetime plan is something new. So we've got a lot of photographers that want a little bit more of a personal relationship. They want to understand where they need to go with their work, what they need to do. On our mentor plan, you basically deliver a portfolio of work to us. I assess that portfolio and I point out all of the positives and negatives of your portfolio, and then I direct you to our training that is most relevant to what you need to learn, and I give you some other guidance, some other things that you need to research and look at. And then at a given point in time, up to 2 years, but between 6 months and 2 years after that initial preview, that initial submission, you then get to submit another set of images when you think you've kind of evolved your skills. And that set of images, I think it's 10 images, is then evaluated, and then we certify you based on that submission. So we never wanted to produce a certification that was meaningless, i.e. you do one of our courses and we say, yes, you've done the course, here's a certificate, because that doesn't mean anything. We want to certify you based on an evaluation of how good we really think your work is. So on your second submission of images after your mentorship, we then evaluate that and you're awarded a certificate. I can say the word.
A certificate.
You're awarded a certificate with a percentage score based on that second submission. If we think you're going to fail or you haven't achieved the desired pass rate, we will go back to you and say you still need to do some more work here. There's still things you need to develop and look at. So it's just a more personalized version of our membership, where I will give you some guidance on where your strengths lie, where your weaknesses lie, and try and direct you in the right way.
And obviously the joy is you have access to Karl Taylor education for as long as
you're absolutely right. That's the other thing. It's
that's
a
quite
lifetime
a
plan.
bonus.
So instead of paying monthly or instead of yearly, once you've paid for the mentor plan, you're a member for life. So even after the mentorship thing's finished, you get to access all the classes and courses that we produce from now going forwards. Now, while you're finding that last question, I just want to give a shout out to my mate Terry Hope, who's the publisher of this magazine called Photo Professional. We advertise regularly in this magazine, and Terry kindly ran an article on our recent environmental marine pollution campaign work that we did, and he ran a whole story about it and the behind the scenes. So thanks to Terry for running that article. It's a great little magazine, actually. You want to check that out if you're in the UK. I think you can get it on subscription if you're elsewhere in the world. Let's take one final question, because I can't even hear
I know.
I don't know how Ben's finding that on the video desk, but I can barely hear myself over the rain hitting the roof.
This is more of a request than a question, but someone is asking for a tutorial on composition, not the regular boring rule of thirds, but what goes through your mind when you compose an image, which is quite a problem.
That's coming in January. That's coming in January, okay? Look out for that. There's lots of stuff coming in January. It's not coming now because we're working on it. It's not coming in December because December's just a wipeout, isn't it, with Christmas and all that business. In January, when everyone's focused, laser focused with a fresh mind and they want to get into it, it's all happening in January here on KarlTaylorEducation.com.
And it will be worth the wait.
Oh yes, it will be. Right, thank you for tuning in. Sorry if we didn't get a chance to answer your questions. Obviously, we get loads and loads of questions come in, but we will be live on social media at some point again in the future. Don't forget to check out what we've got going on KarlTaylorEducation.com.
Oh, I almost forgot.
Oh yes.
Don't forget to follow us on social media as well, because obviously we have so much going on the website. We try to keep you up to date via emails and everything, but we post everything that we've got coming, that we've done, common things. Everything's on social media, especially our Facebook group for members, which is Karl Taylor Education Members on Facebook. That's a great place to share your work, chat to other photographers, ask questions, get feedback.
And we do critiques on there as well for our members.
Make sure to follow us on all the social media platforms.
Okay, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.